Hi, everyone. My name is Kat Trago. I'm the president of the Wisconsin ACEDS chapter, and I would like to welcome you to the first program in our four-part series on emojis. And I just want to highlight that this is a collaborative effort between the chapters of Chicago, Colorado, Detroit, Jacksonville, Ohio, Twin Cities, and also Wisconsin. So we're very excited that Eric Parrish is going to be presenting the first session today. Just wanted to give you all a quick, for those of you who may not know, this is the first session in a four-part series. Following today's discussion, we will have an opportunity for vendors of software to show how their software works with emojis. And that will be in October. I forgot what month it is. And then in November, Kelly Twigger is going to lead she's going to moderate a judges panel, and we'll have further discussion on what they're seeing emerge in their courtrooms regarding emojis. And then finally, we're going to have a fun networking opportunity for everyone to get together and have some snacks around the holidays in December and address kind of a challenge, but that'll be a fun kind of put it all together program. So I hope that everyone on this call is able to join us for all four. Today's call is CLE approved and CLE will be available in all 50 states. We will also have paralegal certificates. So and we will contact anybody who is interested in CLE. We'll make that available following the discussion today. So ACEDS will send you an email and then you can sign up for your CLE. The final piece of news before we get started is that upcoming, we had hoped to get this up by today, but it's a couple days late, is we will have all the information that you will need for self-collect, for vendors participating in the vendor challenge, information and the cases that are discussed during the judges panel. All that information will be available on a central website. And again, we will contact anyone registered for this session and any future sessions with that information. So keep your eyes out for any of the ACEDS emails because there's some important information coming. So with that, I would like to introduce Eric Parrish from Trust Point One, who actually I saw him present several months ago on this topic, and that is what inspired this entire series. Oh. So we're thrilled to have Eric today, and in order to give him the most time, I'm going to turn the program over to him. Any questions, please put in the Q&A, and Summer Wall from the Chicago chapter, or I'm sorry, from the Colorado chapter is going to moderate that. So with that, Eric, thank you so much, and I will let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Kat. As mentioned, I'm Eric Parrish. I'm a senior director with Trust Point One, and I have been working in the legal vertical for about 18 years at this point, practicing attorney way back in the day in Minneapolis for a few years. Here today to talk with you about the hidden risky business of emojis. And my goals are a couple-fold. One, obviously wants you to take something away that you can use professionally. I mean, ACEDS and all that. And this is great that I'm starting off the ACEDS four-part series. This is great to be the inaugural session and kind of set the stage for everything. That's really neat. Never been a part of a series on emoji before. And then secondly, want you to be able to take some things away that you can use in your personal life as well. So those are my goals that you can walk away with. And personally, I love giving this presentation. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's an interesting topic. So kind of a third goal is that you find this interesting and kind of a little bit fun as well, and maybe some aha moments in there as we're going through. Those would be my goals. Now, my agenda looks like this. And I know because I've been doing this presentation for 4.5, 5 years, and there's always people in the audience that are what are we going to talk about? My Little Pony next? Really? Emoji? These cute little pictures that are a serious legal topic? So I know that there's some of you out there, I can't see you. So I want to caveat that I'm going to start off the presentation. It's going to be a little light and fluffy as we set the stage with emojis. But as we move forward, it's going to get a little more weighty, and there's going to be case law and things of that nature. So if you're sitting there thinking, is this really for real? Hopefully for you specifically, you'll come away with an understanding that yes, there are some very serious things that need to be taken into account when working with emoji. So there's the agenda that I've got laid out for us sort of broadly. But with that, unless there are any other opening comments, I will jump into it. All right, hearing none. So start at the very beginning, right? Emoji, emoticon, what are they? So we've all heard these terms. They're used interchangeably very often, but they are different. So on the left there, we have an emoticon, and on the right, we have an emoji. Now, the difference being an emoji is a picture, and an emoticon is something that you can make with the characters on your keyboard. So here we got a colon, a hyphen, a parenthesis. You can't make an emoji with the characters on your keyboard. So that's the distinction between the two. Now, the emoticon was invented by a professor at Carnegie Mellon University working in the IT lab when he saw that chats and communications, the nuance was being lost. So he invented the emoticon to make sure that the intent of the speaker, the writer, was transmitted. And that's exactly the way we use them today. Same with emoji. Now, emoji were invented in Japan. So the question is, how old is this technology? And the answer might be a little surprising to you. Emoticons were invented in 1982 and emoji in 1999. So that means both of these are last century technology, going way back, right? So the question is, why is it that they've really just sprung to consciousness for us in much recent history? So I'm guessing that most of you kind of did this informal poll. You've only been really using emoji in the past 7-8 years or so. But there's a reason that they're more recent to us, even though they're last century technology with their usage being an uptake. And we can look to a specific point in time. And you can see that here on this graph. You can see that we've got emoji going along. And then in 2010, there's a spike. And what happened was in 2010, Apple came out with a new operating system for their iPhone that included an emoji keyboard. So for the first time, millions of people quite literally had emoji at their fingertips, and they liked what they saw. And they started using them, and they burst into our consciousness, and we're really off to the races with them. Now you can see here on the left, it says emoji in 1995 were invented, but some emoji nerds that talk and compare notes and talk about all these things, we're all very convinced it's 1999 when it was actually invented. But I like this graph to illustrate the point, kind of why they burst onto the scene more recently, sort of in our cultural consciousness. Now, this graph is from, you see there at the bottom, from the Unicode Consortium. And if you're not familiar with them, they are the standard keepers for all the things on our keyboards, characters and fonts, to make sure that we're all literally and figuratively on the same page, that everything looks the same for us. And they are the ones that come out with the new emoji each year. So they look at what's going on in the world culturally, how are people communicating, how are things changing, where are there gaps in the emoji set, to decide what would be an appropriate emoji to release that year. So it's a little bit dynamic, kind of paying attention to what's happening. That's how we get new emoji every single year. And here are some of the emoji that we've gotten over the past couple of years here, including this year. And you can see in 2020, there's a notable one there, the flag. So flags as a category are very not popular, that nobody really uses them too terribly often. They're all the way over on the right if you have to scroll, at least on an iPhone. So they're not easy to get to. So they're not very popular. But the transgender flag there, when it came out, exploded in popularity immediately and remains very popular. So that is a standout in emoji land for a flag that's very popular, even though as a whole, they're not. Then we get into 2021 when we're in the heart of the pandemic. And I think that the cultural reflection of the emoji is reflected very strongly here. Because if you look at some of these, we've got the broken heart, which in the middle of the pandemic, I think many of us were feeling that way. Same with the spiral eyes guy, like what's going on? Things are out of control. I don't understand necessarily what's happening. And then disconnected person in the clouds floating away. I think many of us felt that way during the pandemic, the middle of it, being on the lockdowns and everything, just drifting away from our life, not able to get out and socialize. So there, I think, is a reflection of the Unicode Consortium saying, hey, these emojis kind of reflect the way we're feeling. Then you get into 2022, and not quite the same degree. I can't point to anything to say that, wow, this is reflective of the culture. But what was interesting to me was we got the vulture. And my first reaction was, oh, great, vulture. That's fantastic. I'm glad we have that now. But I looked into it a little bit more, and I think that it's instructive as to how the Unicode Consortium goes about coming up with new emoji, because if you start to peel the layers back on the vulture, I think it's interesting. So what we have here is the vulture being petitioned by others to the Unicode Consortium to say, hey, we should have this as an emoji. And the arguments for it were that the vulture is a raptor, and the other raptors in the emoji set, owls and eagles, they're visually distinct from a vulture, which is bald. So it's visually distinct. It's also ecologically distinct, since the others are birds of prey, where the vulture is carrion. So a different ecological role as well. But then it gets into the communication within our culture. So the vulture is highly symbolic. And if you think about it, you probably are already thinking of some of the things that it means. The obvious first one is death. It's symbolic for death, but it's also symbolic for greed and patience, as it circles waiting for the inevitable to happen. And then in other cultures, it's a symbol of protection, and it's attributed to clairvoyant powers to it. So there's a lot more going on with it than just, oh, there's that ugly looking bird, right? So the symbolism that it plays in our culture is coming into play here. And so it was looked at, Google searches going back about 20 years to kind of justify this and say, hey, it really is persistent. So they looked at how often vulture was searched for as compared to elephant. And to nobody's surprise, the elephant is searched for way more, and it fluctuates. But the vulture was there, not by a lot, but it was consistently there, year over year over year over year, just undergirding our culture and our symbolic language. Then they went one step further and went all the way back to the beginning of the 19th century and looked at it. And the elephant was even more popular then, way crazy popular. But there's the vulture from the early 1800s, just barely there, but always there. And so it was recognized that the vulture plays a significant role in our culture, although it's often underappreciated. And now we have the vulture emoji. So I thought that was kind of an interesting journey in how they come to decide some of these emoji. When you first look at them, you're like, really? Why did we need that? So oftentimes there's more to the story. Now, obviously the vulture is not a particularly popular emoji. So what is popular? And here we can see popularity by men and women and by regions. And Joyful Tears is the winner here. It's the most popular emoji, or has been for a long time. There'll be more to the story on Joyful Tears. And hearts and smiley face obviously make a great showing. But here's a theme that we're going to set that's going to carry through the entire presentation. What's popular is going to vary by groups. So if we start breaking down men and women into subgroups and cliques, it's going to change. If we start breaking regions down into subregions, cities, neighborhoods, blocks, you're going to see different emoji that come to the forefront as the popular ones. So this is just sort of a rough, big picture snapshot of what is a popular in emoji land. And this changing as we get smaller will carry through the presentation. Now, Joyful Tears, it's been so popular that it was named the word of the year in 2015. Now, not emoji, that picture, that particular emoji is the word of the year, which upset linguists because it's not really a word right now. I suppose there's an argument that letters and words are symbols and an emoji is a symbol, so maybe it works, but the purist linguists aren't going to buy that argument. So there we are. It's been the most popular. But again, we'll come back to the story on Joyful Tears a little bit further on in the presentation. So hold some thoughts around that one. Now, when we get to the workplace, this can be a little bit contentious. Emoji, everybody was hesitant, right? You can see 2016, 33%, now 2020, many more people are using emoji, which is not surprising, right, given the amount of remote work. But the question is, do emoji belong in the workplace at all? Now, depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. Those that are at the end of their career, there's a lot of the curmudgeon attitudes that like, no, never, for any purpose at all, don't want to see it, it's childish, it's terrible. You go to those that are newer in their career, should emoji be used in the workplace? And they'll look at you like, well, should I wear clothes too? I mean, obviously we should be using emoji in the workplace. So there's this cultural generational tension. And as people retire, those that are more open to using emoji are coming to the fore. And then there's other trends that are driving it, which we will talk about here. But here's, you can see how they're being used more often in the workplace. Now, there are advantages to it. So if you are like, no, we should never use them, I use them sparingly, maybe these will get you to reconsider that maybe you should be using them a little bit more in certain places, because we can see here that 71% of global emoji users feel that using emoji at work positively impacts likability and credibility. So if you can get a credibility boost just from using a smiley face, I mean, that's an easy win, right? Again, it's going to depend on who you're talking to. And I'm certainly aware that in the legal space, we're a little more buttoned up and maybe it's less likely to use them all the time, but perhaps some thought that using them is an okay thing, because beyond being likable and credible, it also makes you look more cool, funnier, friendly, positively impacts mental health, more empathetic. So these are large numbers, right? So there's a lot of benefits that are coming from using emoji. And then you can see here the top 5 emoji just in general. Again, joyful tears at the top. We'll get back to that. So there's a lot of reasons for why you might want to consider them. And I think these 2 numbers really jump out, because what it says is you are more likely to get an authentic communication from somebody if they are able to use emoji, because they're more likely to use emoji on the phone or in person. They're more likely to express their emotions more thoroughly if they can use emoji than if they can't. So that's a huge jump. Using emoji will allow you to get more authentic conversations or communications with somebody. I think that's a powerful reason for thinking why we might want to use them and encourage them, and not kind of have a culture of don't use them, right? So it's just something to think about. Further, people want the companies they do business with to market to them with emoji. So it's going to happen. The companies are going to respond to their consumer bases and say, absolutely, if you want emoji, we're going to give them to you, which means you're going to see emoji more often in your litigation, because if they're being used more, they're going to show up more. So that's driving it, that you're going to have to deal with them more often when you're prosecuting your cases. But beyond that, in the workplace, Gen Zers say they would be more satisfied at their jobs if their boss used more emoji. So using emoji gives you better credibility, more empathetic, helps you to get better communication, more authentic communication, and your younger generation just starting out in their career are going to be more satisfied with their jobs if you use them. So those are some really powerful reasons for thinking about having emoji and having a culture that is open to them, whether you're talking to your clients, your client companies, when you're from a law firm, or whether you're an organization, you're thinking about how you position emoji. So those are some very powerful things to think about. Beyond that, if you're not using emoji and you're that emoji curmudgeon, well, you might be having some mental health issues, because the University of Michigan here says that those who don't use emoji are 3 times more likely to drop out of remote work. And they can predict this with, they say, 75% accuracy. Now, what's interesting is it doesn't matter how you're using the emoji. If you're using them to say something positive or to say something negative, it doesn't matter. Just the fact that you're using them gets you over that hurdle. So if you're thinking like you're about ready to burn out and you want to throw people off the path, drop a couple of emoji in there, right? You start gaming the system. But anyway, so it's an interesting thought that emoji usage is reflective of somebody's mental health. Now, we go into work, and what emoji are popular at work? And you can see here, these 3 are popular at the managerial level. They're effective at motivating users, and that's what they're used for. Particularly, you got the strong arm there, you've got the thumbs up, the okay symbol. So particularly the strong arm looking good for motivation, right? So these are popular, but they're also popular with the rank and file, but not for motivating, for a different reason. Now, number 2, not so much, but 1 and 3. It's more of, I acknowledge that you need me to get that report done today. Okay, I see that I don't need to be into work tomorrow. Used as acknowledgement, not for motivating. So the reasons for using them are different, but it still pushes them to be the very popular emoji. What's also interesting is that people use only a small subset of emoji. So you can see that the breakdown for 10, less than 10, or less than 5 in the last 180 days. I think that's fascinating. I think the reason that people use the same emoji set over and over again is because, one, they're their favorite and they're going to want to use it all the time. And number two, your recents are right there. So you're able to like grab that one quickly. Whereas if you think, well, you want to type, I love celery, and you think, I'll use the celery emoji. Is there a celery emoji? You have to like scroll, right, to find it, or you have to go into the emoji search bar to see if there's a celery emoji. And that's kind of tedious. It's a lot easier just to grab that heart that you always use and go I heart and write out celery. That's quicker. So I think that drives people to using the same emoji over and over again. And incidentally, there is no celery emoji at this point. This last time I checked, it's been a couple months. And I think there's a benefit that comes from this as well, because if you start using emoji that you don't normally use, you run into the possible danger of stepping upon a secondary meaning. And we'll talk about secondary meanings. And I'm guessing that some of you out there that have kids or grandkids have run into, you've used an emoji and they've texted back and said, Mom, Grandma, Grandpa, do you know what that means? Because you're thinking it means one thing and they're like, that totally means something totally different. And so there's that part of it. You're less likely to wander into those weeds if you use the same emoji over and over again that you're used to using. So there is a little bit of an advantage. Now, here we are with emoji explosion. And what's driving that is remote work. We've got everybody working remote through COVID and the lockdown. And although remote work is decreasing to a degree, it's still much elevated over where it was. And you can see here the Teams uptake that Microsoft had right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so that is what is really driving emoji usage. Because now all those meetings that you would have in person, in the hallway, just bumping into somebody over lunch, there's no emoji available in those situations, right? And I mean, if there was, it would be really weird. You hold up a Post-it note or something. It's crazy, right? Nobody's using emoji in in-person meetings. But when everything is remote, now everything you're doing has an emoji set available to you. And because people were feeling disconnected and sort of out of sorts in their life, and we've shown that emoji allow for greater emotional connection and more of a feeling of belonging, people wanted those feelings, and so they reached out to emojis to help with that. So not only are they available, but they're filling a specific emotional niche that people are looking for potentially when they are working remotely. So those two things are driving emoji uptake and usage. And then beyond that, Microsoft and the various platforms are creating all sorts of emojis. Now, the Unicode Consortium comes out with emojis, which are going to be across all platforms. And then each individual tech company can create their own that are just unique to their own platform as well. So you've got Microsoft here going from 85 to over 800 emojis. So there's lots of experimentation and lots of places that people can start using emoji and playing with them. Now, of course, Teams is not the only platform out there. There are many. I mean, we're here on Zoom, right? So we've got Zoom, Teams, Slack, and there's a myriad of others. And this is simply the reminder that these emoji are going to be on these platforms as well. Are you collecting them to make sure that you're getting all the information you need? The day of eDiscovery being largely driven by email is over. I know I talked to some practitioners and they're finally coming around that text is something they should collect. Well, now you also need to collect from the collaboration platforms, obviously. And they have lots of emoji in them. And you can see that those that are younger in their career think email is antiquated and not the best way to talk. They want to use the platforms in general. But Slack, I want to highlight a little bit with what they're doing because they're doing something unique. So when you are in a Slack channel and having a conversation, they have created a way for an emoji to be used to route information. Usually when we think of emoji usage, we're thinking of it as substituting for a word like I heart, or modifying a word or a sentence. But here, they're not doing that. Instead, they are routing entire information to be used to do so quickly. So what we've got here is the React Sheet Channeler. And the way it works, if you're in a conversation on Slack and you're discussing something, and you realize that you've gotten to a point, like here it's with legal, that another group needs to be brought into the conversation and you want to put the chat in front of them, you simply hit an emoji and Slack will route that entire conversation over to them. Here it's with legal, they're talking about naming the reactee, actually reactee. So they hit the gavel and boom, it gets ported over to legal and whoever's on that side to take a look at what they're discussing. So that's a new way to use emoji, routing information. Now here's a second way that emoji route information as well. And that's with what's called a YAT. So you can see one there at the bottom. And a YAT is basically a URL, a URL being what you type into your web browser to go to a website like yahoo.com, google.com. That's a URL using words and letters. Now we have URLs that you can put in to your web browser that is emojis. And the way it works is it's y.at/ and then a unique string of emoji, and that YAT at the bottom there, that's mine, legal tech ideas and predictions. And I think I have it pointed at my LinkedIn page. And so I'm the only one that can have that particular combination of emojis, just like with a URL. You can go buy it and it's yours. Nobody else can use it. You can sell it and you can point it to whatever web resource you want to point it to. And the way it works is similar to URLs. The more rare or interesting it is, the more expensive it's going to be, right? If you want to go buy diamonds.com, that's going to be crazy expensive. If you want to buy something that's very long, diamonds in your backyard for free.com, that's going to be much cheaper to get. Same with YATs. You can have 1 to 4 emojis in your YAT. And the more you have, the less expensive the entire purchase is. So with something that's 5 emojis long, if they're very unpopular emoji, it might be $4 to buy the YAT. But if you want a single emoji that's very popular, like joyful tears, it's going to be crazy expensive. And then it's a gradation in between. So that's what the YAT is. You type that in, it's visuals to take you to a web page. So that's emojis channeling and routing information as opposed to just being modifiers for text. So now what we want to do is shift gears a little bit and kind of go into the darker side of emoji and the problems that they can present. And this is where I have my second message, second big takeaway that I hope that you get out of the presentation. The first one being that emoji usage is beneficial in a lot of different ways for people and their emotional health and the way they feel engaged. So that's the first one. Now, the second one here is to understand, and particularly for this audience, ASEDS, that not all e-discovery technology is the same when it comes to emojis. 4 years ago or so, 5 years ago, nobody was handling emoji very well. Now that's changed. We're in this weird area where some platforms handle emoji really well, others don't. Eventually, and it's constantly changing, right? The technology is always updating. Eventually we get to a point where everybody's handling emoji as they should, but we're not there yet. So there's this, some are good, some are bad. The legacy in-house platforms are on the bad side. And then, Relativity, 800-pound gorilla is doing a very nice job, obviously. So the question here is the takeaway. When you're getting into litigation and you're looking at the technology you're going to use, it's vitally important to ask the questions about how does it handle emoji? Are the emoji going to be collected? How will they be displayed? What are the limitations here? You need to know. And this is particular for those of you that are like, emoji are just silly little pictures, I don't care, right? And I can beat on this drum, but I think the best way to illustrate it is just with an example. So why emoji are important and why you need to make sure your technology can handle them appropriately. Let's start here. Need coverage for James. Seriously, James called off again. What's the deal? Why does that surprise you? So if you're in an investigation, you got some litigation, you come across this, it's gonna catch your attention. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we need to follow up on that, right? That's got a little heat behind it. But if the technology you're using doesn't handle emoji, doesn't render them, doesn't display them, you miss this. So this just went from being of interest, we've got a problem. We've got a very serious problem here, particularly if the EEOC is involved for some reason. This just got hot. Now, here's the problem. You can't see the emoji, but opposing counsel can. You're both building your theory of the case simultaneously, going through the process. They know what this email is really saying. You think you know what it's saying. You don't. And so eventually you're going to meet a point there where you're going to have a problem. And because you're at a competitive disadvantage, because you don't have all the information, even though you think you do, because you can't see the full communication because the emoji are missing. Another example. Mary came into my office today. Apparently, John is making suggestive comments about something she was wearing yesterday. Can you please look into this? I'll be out on vacation until next week. Are you kidding me? She complains about everything. Yeah, I'll look into it. Painting nails emoji, which means I've got better things to do. I would rather cut my lawn with scissors or watch paint dry or go to the submarine races, all those cliches, right? So if you can't see that emoji, you think, well, okay, she's going to look into it. It's getting handled and it's a situation that needs to be looked into. She's going to do it. But with the emoji, now she really doesn't want to. And honestly, she might not ever look into it. So again, if you're not aware that it's there, you might think you understand what's going on, but your understanding is basically 180 degrees from what the email really means. Now, those of you that are younger in your careers are probably thinking, that's not what the painting nail emoji means. And you might be texting your colleague right now, what did he just say? That's crazy. So hold that thought. We'll come back to the painting nails emoji when we get into secondary meanings. Okay, so next one. One more example. Hey, what's up? Did you see the new intern? All right, so this is pretty benign, right? Did you see the new intern? Maybe it should be, did you speak with, did you meet? But really, this isn't going to raise any flags. Again, if your technology can't see the emoji, you missed that. And that clearly is a problem. We got harassment going on all over the place here, right? That's not appropriate anywhere. You have an issue. Conversations need to be had moving forward. And if it's in lawsuit, if you're in litigation, again, you're at a competitive disadvantage if you can't see them. But not everything is all doom and gloom. So we've got the skin tones for emoji. And when these were coming out, there was fear that they might be problematic, and you can understand why. But fortunately, everybody seems to be playing nicely with these, and we're getting along in the sandbox, and it's not a problem. But you can it's easy to come up with an idea how this could go sideways. Somebody uses a skin tone to represent somebody. The person's like, that's not me. Why would you think that's me? And then it escalates. So something to think about organizationally as you're advising your clients is, do you set policy around emoji? And one here that would be an obvious one is, we only use the yellow emoji. We don't ever use skin tones for anything. Faces, legs, arm, nothing. It's always yellow or nothing. Then if something pops up and you have a problem around a skin tone, if somebody still used it, you've at least got some insulation to say, hey, we train that you only use the yellow ones. It's in the employee handbook. She signed off on it. So that gives you some insulation from the problems that might come from it. So just something to think about with policy around emoji. Now, Wall Street is already ahead of this, and they have banned, if you will, money-themed emoji for obvious reasons. They can be seen as promissory, and they don't want to be put in a position where somebody can say, well, I thought you used that emoji and it meant this, and now we're having those sorts of conversations. So emoji on Wall Street that are money-themed, no good. Looking at your clients or looking at the industry that you're in, if you're in-house, what emoji would you say should never be used just because of the nature of the industry you're in, particularly obviously if you're regulated? So something to think about. Now, this was this was interesting for me when I came across this information the first time, because it hadn't occurred to me at all, and I was like, wow, this is good. So this is from Easter Seals. Thing, how do you use emoji when you're thinking about those that are visually impaired? And the reason for this is visually impaired will have software technology that reads their emails and their texts and their messages to them. So what happens is, if you get a text that has 15 joyful tears in it, you can just see all 15 and you just skip past it in an instant. But with the software and the technology, it's going to go joyful tears emoji, 15 times. And that's tedious to anybody, right? Nobody wants that. So the takeaways are, use a few emoji, because as they say in the article that the visually impaired like emoji just like everybody else. There's no difference. They're humans, so they like emoji as well. But you just got to be careful. Don't use too many. Don't put the call to action after the emoji. Just be sparing with them, and then you're going to be better off with that demographic. So I was like, well, that's pretty powerful information to think about from an emoji usage perspective. All right, now we get deeper in the weeds here. Emoji as an evolving language. So emoji individually and as a group, their meanings morph, just like in the English language, right? And I sound like an old guy here, but the word sick, it used to always be like, oh, somebody's ill, but now sick can mean, wow, that's really cool, that's awesome, depending on how it's being used, right? So there, it happens with words. That same thing happens with emoji, that they start to take on other meanings, and then also they are a language in the sense that they can be used like hieroglyphics. You can communicate just using these pictures and convey entire thoughts. But evolving language part, Gen Z admits that they use all the time, frequently use emoji for meanings that are different than what the intended meanings are. So now if you think you know what that emoji means, you have to ask the question, do you really? And you start have to looking at context and what else is going on. Now, this is Keith Baroni. He's one to help with all this evolving language and figuring things out. He was hired by Today's Translations out of the City of London after they realized that emoji were important, and this is 2015. They were important and they needed to be part of the translations, and their clients needed to understand what emoji meant. And so they put out to hire an emoji translator. Hundreds of people applied. As part of the interview process, it was translating emoji into text and text into emoji, including classical literature. So we might have Shakespeare emoji at this point, I think. And so he won, and that's what that says at the bottom: world's first emoji translator, an entire idea being conveyed in emoji. He is now the editor-in-chief at Emojipedia, which is a great resource for understanding how emoji evolve and what they mean. And so if you're looking at something, you're like, what is this? You can go over to Emojipedia, and that'll help fill in your gaps. And Keith leads the charge over there. Okay, back to joyful tears. It's just not cool anymore for Gen Zers. They're like, yeah, joyful tears has been at the top of the perch for years and years and years. We're knocking it off. And now the most popular emoji on Twitter is loudly crying, which is right there in the middle of your screen. And the way it is used along with the skull is to say, I'm dying with laughter, or I'm laughing so hard. So something that's historically been a symbol for death is now a symbol for, wow, that's really funny. I'm dead. It's so funny. So that is the evolution. So loudly crying is now taken the place of joyful tears after many, many years. So again, coming back to how is it being used? What does it mean? Because just because you see the skull doesn't mean that they're talking about death. In fact, they might be talking about something that's completely removed from death. Further meaning, secondary meaning. So here we have peach, which obviously is a fruit. It can be used that way. But if you have even a little bit of imagination, you can look at that emoji right there, and you can recognize that it just might well resemble a body part. So that's the secondary meaning that it's taken on. So I know that if my mother is texting me a peach, she's talking about the peach trees or peach cobbler. But if you're getting the peach emoji at bar close, they're probably not talking about peach cobbler. So again, it goes back to context. How is this emoji being used? What does it mean in various contexts? And you have to think about that as you're doing your reviews or looking at things, communications in your organization. And then actually the peach got a tertiary meaning when Lizzo tweeted during Donald Trump's presidency impeachment. You see it right there. And it became a symbol of the Trump resistance. So that became a tertiary meaning. And I think it still has that meaning to a degree since Trump is still on the stage, although obviously not as president, but I think that it's still there to a degree. Here's another one. The OK symbol, which has meant just that for a very long time. Okay, but it got picked up potentially a few years ago as a potential hate symbol for white supremacy or white power. And the way it goes is if you hold up your hand in the OK symbol, you've got 3 fingers pointing up that forms the W, and then the circle in your wrist forms a P for WP, white power. So that is the secondary meaning that it got picked up on. Now, what's interesting is it's also, as we talked about, one of the most popular emojis. So I think that meaning was secondary meaning, but very suppressed. But you still have to think about who's sending it and when, because you can imagine if you're in a discrimination or you got a harassment litigation and you see an OK symbol being sent to somebody, well, okay, you might think that's benign, but wait a minute. Who sent that and to whom? Did they send this to the person that's bringing the litigation? It might mean that secondary meaning here, even though it's less common. We have to stop again and look at context and think about who, where, how, to really get at the true meaning of what's going on. All right, back to painting nails. I said we'd come back to it, so here we are. Secondary meaning. So I was giving this presentation to the Association of Corporate Counsel for the Washington chapter up here in June. And I didn't have the slide because I told them the same thing I said to you, that painting nails means I've got better things to do. And after it was done and we were in the networking cocktail reception, a couple of newer in their career attorneys came up. They're like, you know, you put some wrong information up there. I'm like, I did? Like, you absolutely did. That's not what painting nails means. And I said, well, what's it mean? And they say, it means it's a comment on somebody's sexual orientation. Sorry to bust your bubble. And I'm like, no, this is great. This is fantastic, because you're proving my point that secondary or tertiary meanings can emerge and they mean different things. I'd never heard that. All right. Maybe it's generational. I don't know. I'd never heard that. And I know that painting nails does mean, you know, I've got better things to do, but it also has this meaning that comes along with it. I was like, you're proving my point. This is great. So driving home that evening, going around Puget Sound, I got hungry. So IHOP was there and it was convenient. So I just went into IHOP, and my server came up. She's in her mid-20s, and I'm still thinking about this. And I thought, well, I'm going to do a little research. So I asked her, what does painting nails emoji mean to you? And she said, oh, it's comment on somebody's sexual orientation. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Okay, so it's not just these attorneys, it's you too. So and then there was a booth. I said, we see that booth over there, those four people, and they were also in there, it looked like in their mid-20s. I said, do you think they'd say the same thing? And she goes, I'll go ask him. And she just goes over there, and within a moment, you hear a little bit of laughter. She comes back and she says, yep, same thing. It's comment on somebody's sexual orientation. So now that I'm doing this high-tech research, I'm like, well, I got to look to see if there's a geographic component to this. So I have a sample size of 1. I reached out to my niece who just graduated from college here last year, and I said, what does this mean to you? And she says, oh, it's totally a comment on somebody's sexual orientation. I'm like, okay, so it's not just in Washington, it's also, she's in Indiana, the same meaning is over there as well. So that's interesting. But she says also means you're being petty and that you're doing your nails. All right, okay, that's great. So there's a couple different meanings there, right? So that was instructive to me, that maybe it's a generational thing. I've never heard it. Maybe others in my generation have, but I'm not aware of it. People that are my age that I've talked about emoji about, nobody's mentioned it. So here we are. Maybe it's a generational thing, but just something to keep in mind. All right, now we get into emoji. Instead of being a single emoji modifying something, start getting into that hieroglyphics part. So here we have coffee, rabbit, dog. Oh, they're cute, right? Rabbits and dogs, they're so cute. What are we talking about here? Should you be concerned if you see this in your litigation? Should you be concerned if you're in-house and you see this on chats? What if we change rabbit to hair, another name for rabbit? We get coffee, hair, dog, coffee, hair of the dog. Oh, right, that means you're drinking to blunt a hangover that you have. And if you're sending this at work, it means you're probably going out to have some alcohol midday drinking in the middle of the job. How does that potentially impact what you're doing? That could be interesting. So a rabbit and a dog emoji could tell you something about people's emotional states, which would obviously have a bearing on whatever's happening in your litigation. So a couple more fun examples. I'll go through these kind of quickly, but just to kind of give you a sense of how they convey entire ideas. Because here's the thing, when you see strings of emoji from adults, it means something. My kids, when they were 3 or 4 years old, they would put in strings of emoji, right? Oh, they just think it's cute, so they put them all in there. It's just gibberish. Adults don't do that. They're saying something almost always. Nothing is 100%. But if you see a string of emojis, don't write it off as just gibberish. So let's take just a quick spin through some examples. What does this one mean? Let's give you kind of a little second. It's not too terribly hard to crack, but it's stop playing with fire. This one's a little more difficult because it's got more emoji, but the X means stop or don't. So we've got don't bite the hand that feeds you. And this next one was kind of popular memeing around on the internet a couple of years ago. So you may have seen this one, I believe sheep. If we change the sheep to a U, we get I believe you, I believe you. Okay, next one. And this one's pretty straightforward. I think this one's relatively easy to get. It's like, don't cry over spilled milk. And now this next one is not only is it emoji representing saying something, but it's also a play on words. So this one's a little tougher. I'll give you a second to think about it. We've got the 3 whales. What could 3 whales possibly mean? And what it means is well. And I thought, when I first saw that, I'm like, well, there's got to be a wishing well emoji. I mean, that's just right, isn't there? And there's not. There are no well emojis. So the closest we can get is with whales, with whale. So there you are, some plays on words, the way entire thoughts can be conveyed using emoji. And it was instructive too. It's been a few years. I forget what year it was, but Chevy came out with a press release that was all an emoji for their cruise when they were releasing that. The entire press release was emoji, and colleagues and I took a crack at it, and we got some of it, but a lot of it where we couldn't get it. But it was a fun exercise, and obviously Chevy eventually released it in many different languages as opposed to just emoji. But we had an entire press release just in emoji at one point. All right, so this is the reminder again with all of this to look at context. And this is Facebook. So they have moderators looking for illegal activity, harassment, bullying, all those sorts of things. And so they need to be trained up on what these emoji mean. And they're flagging the ones that can mean bad actions or bad activity. But even then, you can see over on the right under sexual solicitation, they say, as always, context is key. So that is a very important point. Just because there was sexual solicitation, you have the kiss lipstick, it doesn't mean that anything bad is going on. Context is always key. Shifting gears a little bit, going into the marketing land to talk about a few things here. So here we have Cookie Monster, and Cookie Monster was disrespected on World Chocolate Day because he tweeted out that on World Chocolate Day that he was eating lots of chocolate chip cookies, and he put a whole bunch of chocolate chip cookies emojis behind it, and that was great for everybody except Samsung, since their chocolate chip cookie was actually saltine crackers. So Cookie Monster, Samsung, sorry, I'm sure. They've obviously corrected this, but here we are. This is where we get into the world of the Unicode Consortium comes out with the emoji that we're gonna make a chocolate chip cookie, and then each tech company creates their own version for IP reasons to look a little bit different. And then we have Samsung that goof. But here's the thing, how often does that happen? How often are new emoji coming out and somebody has stepped on it and it's not what you think? Because you're on an Apple device or a Google device and you're sending a chocolate chip cookie and you thinking the person on the other end is getting a cookie. They're not, they're getting a cracker. So that's not likely to ever cause problems, but litigation is born out of that's not likely to be a problem, right? Until it is, and then we have things like this happening, it becomes a problem. Now, I look at these cookies and I go, I think Microsoft has an issue. That looks like a pizza, and Google looks like a rock. That doesn't even look like a chocolate chip cookie. I think they're just not the best chocolate chip cookie emojis ever. But so that's something to think about. And then what can happen is providers can change the emoji, even though they've been using it for a long time, they can just change what it looks like. And that's what happened with Apple. Apple, all the handgun emojis look like actual handguns, whether it was an automatic or a revolver. Apple decided after a period of time that that wasn't appropriate given the mass shootings. And so they changed their handgun emoji to that squirt gun that you see there, an orange and green squirt gun. Now we have this period of time where you could be maybe sending a text and you're saying, just having a little summer fun with squirt gun emoji and shooting the kids. All right. Well, if somebody's on the other end and they're not on Apple, they're getting just having a little summer fun shooting the kids automatic handgun. The difference is profound, right? So that's how it can become a problem. Now, fortunately, you can see that Google, Samsung, and Microsoft have changed their handguns to squirt guns as well. But LG and HTC still have realistic looking handguns. HTC to a lesser degree, but LG, obviously, that's a pretty realistic looking automatic right there, right? So if you're texting from Apple to LG, that person is going to get an actual handgun, not that cute orange and green one. That's an actual problem still now today, or at least I should say as of a month ago. I didn't check here right before the presentation, but that was still live as of a month ago. So that's something to keep in mind. And then how often are other emoji going to change that present the same problem? Something to think about. Now, this is the other thing, the way it can look when you're getting into emoji and they look different by platforms, even if the emoji is still roughly the same. So it doesn't have to be radically different like we have with the gun. So my colleague, Matt Mann here, he got an email on Lotus Notes, and you can see there what he got with the emojis. We've got the sunglasses guy emoji, and he's got the smile of sorts and the thumbs up. That's in Lotus Notes. we go over to Matt's iPads, now we have the clear, cool sunglasses guy with the thumbs up. That guy's laid back. He looks happy. Looks a little different from the way it looks in Lotus Notes, right? Even though it's the same emoji, it looks different, but it's not radically different like with the guns. But then if we go over to Matt Samsung and Galaxy in preview, that sunglasses guy, he looks malicious. He's not friendly. That guy's up to something. He's cool in a whole other criminal kind of way, it looks like to me. But then if you go into the actual body of the email, there are no emoji at all. So now, again, it comes back to, it shouldn't be a problem, but you can see how you can say, well, which one did you see first in litigation? How did that impact your mental state? How did that impact your intent and what you were thinking about the message that was being sent? So obviously not often to be a problem, but until it is. And then coming back to policy. So here we had during the playoffs back in 2015, the Houston Rockets were playing the Dallas Mavericks. The Rockets were winning. And so the social media manager tweeted this, should close your eyes, it will all be over soon, which went over about as well as you might think that it would. And he lost his job as a result. But it brings to the fore, even if you say, let's use emoji in our organization, maybe there's some that we don't use public facing. Maybe only certain people can use certain emojis, and have that conversation. It's not just blanket, we use emoji, we don't use emoji. It's in this context we use them, in this context we don't, and in this context the ones we use are these and we don't use those. That's the conversation to start having internally in-house, maybe if you're advising your clients to think about emoji and the problems that they can present. Then we had Body Armor doing a taste test to promote their sports, their energy drink. And they had Baker Mayfield, the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, in the blind taste test, and they were feeding him Body Armor drinks, and he was liking them, and he thought they were good. And then they handed him Gatorade's orange thirst quencher, and when he drank that, he was like, "Oh, this is awful," and gave it this is gross face simultaneously while these emoji popped up. Joyful tears because, haha, we just pranked him. Isn't that funny? But then the nausea one because, Gatorade tastes gross. Well, of course, Gatorade took exception to this and brought it before the National Advertising Division of Better Business Bureau, Alternative Dispute Forum, for Truth in Advertising. And they sided with Gatorade saying, hey, emoji are not purely subjective. They can communicate things. And this nausea emoji here goes so far as to express a claim that moves beyond puffery, and without substantiation, Body Armor, you've just given a false claim, and you don't have that. So this is a false claim, and it was ruled that it should be taken down. And they did, of course. Gatorade would grumble that it was, the wrong decision and what have you, but it was taken down. So even in advertising, truth in advertising, emoji can have an impact and can drive the conversation. Then we get to a nod to the ethics piece here. With Alexis Plunkett, she was an attorney in Nevada. And what she was doing was she'd set up some Facebook accounts trying to be anonymous. I think she had some burner phones as well. But long and short of it was she was sending the rat emoji to witnesses to try to intimidate them into not testifying or to change their testifying, meaning rats are people that ratting people out, then snitches get stitches. So if you rat somebody out, you got a problem here. It's a threat, obviously, and they figured out what's going on. She's now in prison, not surprisingly, and it wasn't the first time she had problems with the law. She'd also been busted for smuggling cell phones into prison. So even those with compromised morals can use emoji too. They're available to all of us. So with that, I've touched on it several times that you're going to be seeing emoji use in your litigation, in your investigations much more often because people want to use emoji. They feel more connected. They like emoji. Those younger in their careers, it's part of who they are and what they do. It's coming. They're going to be there. You need to get an understanding of them, is my view. And you can look and see how much that's changed over time. And we've got the emoticon staying roughly the same, but emoji, you're doing the exponential curve thing. There's no reason to think that's going to stop. And you can see in 2010 to 2014, there was that gap before we started seeing emoji usage, but that goes back to, it takes time for things to happen and to work their way through the court system, right? So that's the delay. No surprise there. But that's what's coming down. So let's take a look at some case law. And first off, we have a case out of Israel. And so this is this was like a big case in emoji nerdland. When it came out, it was like, oh my gosh, look at this. So it's been widely discussed as an emoji case. So I always include it. So what had happened here was in Israel, a landlord had an apartment that he had up for rent, and he texted to some prospective tenants that if they wanted the apartment, they could have it. And one of the prospective tenants replied, and when his reply were all of these emoji. The landlord took that to mean that they were going to take it, and he took it off the market. Ultimately, the prospective tenants did not take it, and he moved for what is essentially detrimental reliance. And he prevailed. And the court reasoned to saying, hey, look, all of these emoji together convey great optimism. Yeah, the landlord wasn't wrong in inferring that you meant to take the apartment, because if we look at all these emoji, that's the message that's being sent across. So it's interesting because this is contract law, right? Emoji and contract law. And then you have to think, did the court come to the same conclusion if you only used one of the emoji, like the Spanish dancing girl, the champagne bottle, which are clearly celebratory? What if you just used the chipmunk? Chipmunk's got an acorn, tenant's got an apartment, or what, the flaming meatball meteor? Would one of them done it? 2, 3? It's an interesting intellectual exercise. Obviously, we can't know the answer, but these together, they came to that. Now, what was really going on was that the prospective tenants were having a really hard time finding a flat that they both agreed was one they could live in. So one of them would like it, and the other one wouldn't, and then vice versa, the next one. So this was one that they both could consider for moving into. And he was so excited about the possibility that this might be the one they could get, that he got all excited and sent these texts. He wasn't trying to imply that they were definitely going to take it, merely that, hey, we could take it. Of course, the landlord had no knowledge of that, and that's why the case came out the way it did. All right, Epitaph B. Munich. Here we have an employee on Family Medical Leave Act because she had an asthma condition back in 2014. So she leaves, and a few weeks later, the company gets a tip, an anonymous tip, that she's actually out and about and shopping and doing things that maybe that doesn't look like somebody that's suffering from asthma. Sent out a private investigator who came back and said, yeah, she's loading moving boxes, and she's quite active and exercising and doing all these things. So the organization moved to terminate. And she came back and said, I'm sorry, but you just unlawfully terminated me. I'm doing exactly what my doctor told me to do. He said I needed to get out of the office because there might be something there that's exacerbating my asthma that's in the office. So I needed to get out. And then the job has created a lot of stress and anxiety. So he said I needed to be doing some things that were more physical. So that's why, and I'm moving. So I'm loading my own truck and I'm doing lots of exercises. And so you're wrong. And company came back and said, well, you can understand how it was an honest mistake, that it didn't look right, blah, blah, blah. The court said, yes, we might understand it's an honest mistake, but for your usage of exclamation points and emoticons, that you show that you were not operating in good faith. And so they were remaining on the hook. So there's where emoticon came into play. If it wasn't for the emoticon and the exclamation points, it may have gone differently at that stage. And then we've got Ross Ulbricht, who created the dark website Silk Road for trafficking in narcotics. And so this is one of the first times in like a big way the courts said, these emoji are actually, emoticons are actually important. So during the trial, transcripts were being read of online chats that were going to, evidence against Ross. But when they were reading it, it was just, I'm going to the store emoji, or I'm going to the store emoticon. And the court said, you know what? The jury needs to know which emoji and which emoticon. So they stopped the trial and they brought in experts, trained the jury up on what emoticon and emoji mean. And they were even going to create a quick reference guide for them. And so that was a big moment for the court saying, hey, these matter. Ultimately, it didn't help Ross. He's still serving 2 life sentences plus 40 years, but it's notable in emoji nerdland. It's one of the moments where the courts kind of said, hey, these things matter. We should pay more attention to them. So it'll be interesting to see what the judges panel has to say in this series. I guess it's 2 months from now. So that'll be a good one to hear that. All right, so now we have United States versus Wesley from 2018. Going back to context, this is where it's key. Still, an ATF agent investigating criminal activity around gangs. He sees a public post on Facebook that includes gas pumps and clouds. He knows that gas pumps mean gang activity and clouds mean narcotics. So the state moves to search all of that Facebook account plus a couple others that were affiliated with it. Defense countered saying, look, that's just gibberish. It's just emoji. It doesn't mean anything. Gas pumps and clouds, big deal. I mean, my 3-year-old does it, right? Doesn't mean anything. Well, the state came back and said, actually, no, the ATF agent is uniquely positioned. He's been investigating these gangs and understands gang terminology and gang culture. And for this particular subset of humans, that's what this means, gang activity and narcotics. The motion to suppress was denied, and the state was able to move forward with searching the Facebook accounts. Again, it's context, because if you and I are using gas pump emoji, in all likelihood, we're just crabbing about $4.50 gas, right? Or $5 gas, depending on where you are. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And if we're putting clouds, we're probably saying, oh, what a nice day. We're not talking about narcotics and gang activity, but that's what it means in this very particularized sub-clique of human beings. So that's where you have to come in and understand who you're dealing with and what you're dealing with, because you could have a secondary meaning, a tertiary meaning that's kind of national, but then you can have a fourth meaning that is very particularized, and you need to be aware of that as you're prosecuting your litigation or doing your investigations. Now, this is a fun one. So here we are, Rossbach, from last year. So the plaintiff was alleging that her supervisor sexually harassed and retaliated against her. And you can see over there to the right what allegedly was being said. It starts off with happy birthday hot stuff, and then goes from there. Clearly inappropriate. So she is bringing this suit, but she says she can't provide the actual phone, but she can provide, because it's broken, ink bleed, but she can provide screenshots of the text that he sent. And that's what she did. She provided these screenshots with that emoji in there. And then at the bottom there, you see the arrow that says this image is a fabrication. That's what the court said. The court put that in there to say that this screenshot is a fraud, calling her a liar. And the reason they could do that was because if you look at that emoji was not available or supported on the phone that she had at the time of the alleged harassment. The time she had an iPhone 5, which could only render up to iOS 10. The emoji that she was showing was from iOS 13 or later. And you can see how the emoji, even though it's the same emoji, it changes ever so slightly over time. And since they could confirm that that was the iOS 13 emoji and the image that she sent could possibly be the right one, she's lying. And that was the end of the case, right? Now, if you look at it, iOS 6 to 10, you can see that pretty clearly, but 10 to 10.2, wow, you really got to look closely to figure that out. But here's the good thing. These emoji changing kind of like carbon date your communications. It's kind of like an archaeological dig that can date things for you in a less obvious way to figure out what's going on. So there's a couple lessons to get from this. One is always look at emojis in pairs. What was sent and what was received. Right? So what did he receive? What did the alleged harasser receive? We need to see what he has. He's going to make a different version that'll show a different time frame, right? Maybe. And then you've got emoji just in there taking a look to make sure that everything is the way it should be. And bear in mind that when you're in litigation and you're looking at these emoji, you're looking at them years later. So the version that your review platform is showing you is the current version. The version that was happening at the time of the infractions is very likely years ago and going to be a different version. How does that impact what's happening? Because if we go back and look at Cookie Monster, well, if you were in that time frame, things were being sent, you got the saltine cracker, you're not going to see a saltine cracker when you're reviewing now. You're actually going to see a chocolate chip cookie because it's been fixed. So those time frame differentials are important. And here, obviously, it wasn't a different emoji. It was just slight variation in the same emoji. Here's another case from earlier this year. This one's just sort of just a nod to emojis. There was a lot going on at this workplace here with discrimination and the ability for somebody to do their job, unlawful retaliation. But anyway, the plaintiff learned that the plant manager had in his phone for the contact information for the plaintiff, he was designated by the poop emoji. So every time he called his manager, the poop emoji came up and he knew it was this particular employee that was bringing the litigation. And so defense was granted summary judgment that really was affirmed on appeal, so it didn't go anywhere. But it's just interesting that that a poop emoji came into a discrimination lawsuit, right? So just going back to the point that people are using emoji more often, so they're going to be cropping up more often, and maybe in ways that you weren't necessarily thinking of. So that it's just kind of a nod that direction. All right, now we're going to move into eDiscovery technology. Again, talking about make sure that your technology is able to handle emoji. And then even when it can handle it, be sure to ask some more questions. So here we have relativity being the 800-pound gorilla. I'm almost done. I know I'm over here, so I got to speed it up. Being the 800-pound gorilla, here's their review platform, and you can see what they say about emoji. They say there in the middle, when emojis are rendered in HTML5, relativity uses the native browser to render. When emoji are imaged, the Google set is used. So that's what they're saying. They're saying that if you're using a browser, you're going to get the browser emoji set. So if we look at here, we've got we're in relativity, and we get the Apple set. So we would think then that we're using Safari as the browser, but in actuality, we are using Chrome, but we're on an Apple computer. So somehow relativity was picking up the emoji set from Apple because it was on a Mac operating system, which is not what relativity was saying. So even when your technology providers are telling you something, you need to confirm it, because this is different from what relativity told you, right? They're telling you that this should be the Google sets that you're on Chrome, the computer should be irrelevant. Then if we go over to Windows operating system with Chrome, we do get the Google set. When we go over to Windows operating system with Internet Explorer, we get the Microsoft set as expected. So what all of this means then, though, when we're reviewing, is bear this in mind, that somebody could send the Apple emoji, they receive the Samsung emoji, the person getting the note, it's reviewed by you with the Microsoft emoji, but then when you produce that document that we reviewed, it's in the Google set. So even it's changing all the time. The emojis are constantly changing, and things to bear in mind, which brings the question, should we be using emoji at work at all? Because wow, that was a lot, right? There's a lot of danger in emoji, but we go back to people want to use them, they enjoy them, they think they're great. So yes, should be using them at work because of all the good things that come along with it. No technology is 100% good. There's always a dark side, and we've illustrated that here. And so that is really where we are. The solution then, of course, is, since people like emoji, is to think about policy. On the left are emoji that are arguably okay at work. On the right are ones that you would never use at work. And if you're not sure what one of them means, ask a colleague. Maybe you can use the knife at a culinary school. Maybe you can use the kiss at a cosmetics company, but the others, you probably just need to leave them out at all times. And so a couple things to think about: draft that emoji policy like we've talked about. Won't go too much longer on that, but who can use them and where, maybe never in contracts, much more liberally on social media. Think about policy. And then for discovery, ask questions of the custodians. Ask them, do you use emoji here? Are there any secondary meanings for this company? Are there any secondary meanings for particular emojis for your department? Are there any secondary emoji meanings for your work group? And do you have secondary meanings with even one other colleague where you guys are cracking jokes at people and you're the only two to know that this means something else? Ask the custodians those questions, because that's how you're really going to learn what the communication is. And then, of course, be sure to collect those collaborative platforms. And since there's so much going on here, ask those questions of whoever is helping you with your eDiscovery, whether it's a vendor or somebody in-house, because there's a lot to cover to make sure that you get it right. So with that, I will wrap it up, and let's see, we're just a few minutes over. I love giving this presentation, so I don't know if there's time for questions. Happy to take them, but that's it. That's what I have for you today. Thank you.
Eric, thank you very much. We do have a few questions, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
And for folks that are dropping off, we will include the answers to these questions in the follow-up materials as well. But let's see, a couple key ones that I thought were really interesting. If you use an emoji to transfer information, i.e. to the legal department, this is going back on the routing.
Yeah.
For like using Slack, for example, is there an indicator that someone has seen it or interacted with that information?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's actually a good question. Is there confirmation back to the senders? That I will look into that.
Okay, so that can be a follow-up. Eric will provide you with the questions that are,
sure.
We'll send these to you. Also, what impact does the change in meaning of an emoji have when reviewing documents over a large time period? So like if an emoji was used in 2015 and had one meaning, and then again in 2022, I think is the question, with the same emoji, but it has a different or multiple meanings, how is that interpreted?
Yeah, you're going to have to go back to what the meaning of the emoji was at the time it was sent. You're going to have to look at that, because obviously whoever's sending the emoji has no way of knowing what it's going to mean 7 years later. And so that's the issue, that an emoji maybe becomes kind of toxic in 2022, like the okay symbol, right? But in 2015, all it really meant was okay. So you have to kind of have an archaeological mindset to say, what did these people know at this time, and look at it through that lens. Because if you look at all of the emoji through the current lens, you're going to be missing the information. So it's the same thing with slang, right? If you're reading, going back to when I said that's something sick, if you're reading something from the 1990s, nobody was talking about, oh, that's so sick. They were talking about how, I think in the 90s, it was how rad it was, right? So you're never going to impart the, oh, something is cool in 1990s communication as being sick. Same thing with an emoji, because it just didn't exist.
Got it. And then, thank you. That's interesting. And then finally, why do emojis sent from an Android device sometimes come through an iPhone as punctuation marks? Do you know?
So that's going to be what happens a lot of times is if somebody's got, and that can happen on any platform, right? It's not just Android. I've seen it happen on Apple. If somebody's using they've got an updated operating system that has emoji in it that the other person doesn't have that emoji on their phone, they just don't have it in their operating system. The recipient phone's like, I don't know what that is. So they'll put in, like, sometimes it's a question mark you'll see in emails. It's just a placeholder for there's this. I don't understand what this is, because I don't have it in my emoji set, because I'm an older phone or an older device.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, Summer, am I missing anything? I think I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you, Eric. This is equally as interesting as actually more so than the first time. It's just, there's so much information. And I think it was George Sosha at some point put up a note in the chat asking when the dictionary is coming out to help interpret this. Which for me, I think would just allow me to communicate with my teenager.
Yes, because they're saying things right in front of us that we don't understand.
All the time. All the time.
And it's constantly changing. So Emojipedia can help with that, and there are other resources out there. If you start looking around that can translate, like there's for slang, there's what's urban, I can't remember that. Anyway, urban dictionary or something like that can translate. But if you start poking around, you can start picking up some of these other meanings that are out there.
That's great. Well, thank you. Actually, I might actually do that.
Thanks for having me.
If anyone has any follow-up questions that I've missed or that you think of later, feel free to shoot them over to me, and I will route them over to Eric. Meanwhile, thanks everybody for joining us today. Sorry we ran long, but it's a pretty interesting topic. We look forward to seeing what the vendors are able to do in the next series, which will be on October 13th, also at 11 Central Time. And registrations for that will go out with the follow-up materials. Eric, you will make your slides available, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. And so we will send those to everybody who has registered, and we'll get that over to you. So hope to see you at the next session, and thank you all for joining us. And Eric, a particular thank you to you. This has been very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun. Bye.
Bye.